Just when you thought the Terminator movies were over, it recently came out that James Cameron will regain the rights to the franchise in a couple years. This means he'll be able to finish it himself, and he tends to do things the right way. So I thought about the possibilities and got pretty excited. So, here are 3 ways that Jim Cameron could terminate the Terminator series. Now first, we're going to continue from Terminator 2, and in every case, the movie will take place in the future. This is similar to the other sequels, but those all ended basically the same way, by blowing up Skynet in some form. That worked great when it was new in Terminator 2, but not so much when we've already seen it. So we'll have to do things differently. But if we know what makes a good ending, there's a lot of potential we can explore. So let's get started. Ending 1, closing the circle. Okay, the Resistance smashes Skynet's defense grid, wins, and finds that Skynet's last act was to send 2 Terminators back to the past. John sends Kyle Reese back without telling him anything new, and acknowledges that this was what was always meant to happen. In other words, we take a winding path through the movie. Some unexpected things happen, but the storyline ends exactly where it began, with the time loop closing and John and us knowing that Skynet's last effort will play out in the previous 2 films and fail. Now, first of all, this probably doesn't seem ideal, because normally you don't want the ending to be something the audience already knows. But the trick in most cases is not for the ending to be totally unexpected, but to get there in an unexpected way. So, the ending can loop back to what we already know, as long as the movie can make you expect a different ending. The movie can make it unclear how the timeline can play out.
But this is not the future my mother warned me about.
John can run into unexpected things until it ends up exactly as it was told. But why would we want that? Well, first of all, it's extremely believable. We as viewers might not know much about time travel, but we all can understand if things we've already heard about turn out the way we heard. And it also will add a very strong sense of completeness, because this will get rid of almost every bit of tension from the movie. We know things are finished. And it also perfectly fits the model of events that we already accepted in our head, making the plot feel very solid and logical. But there's one thing you might be wondering about. In Terminator 2, they destroy Cyberdyne and all of the Terminator parts. So how can Skynet get built? Well, it's simple.
Judgment Day is inevitable.
Just kidding, there's a real reason. You see, they did not actually destroy all the parts. Do you remember? That's right, the T-800 left his arm in the factory. If you combine that with whatever knowledge the Cyberdyne employees already had, it makes sense that they'd be able to continue their work. So this ending can fit everything together, except that there's one major issue. The key message of the first 2 films is that we don't have a destiny.
I can't help you with what you must soon face except to say that the future's not set.
There's no fate but what we make for ourselves.
So if the time loop simply plays out perfectly, that violates that whole theme and makes our heroes look foolish, which is very bad. But there's a second approach that, at least in its own way, would put a very good spin on things. Ending 2, the ultimate lesson. Now, there's one thing that James Cameron wrote into Terminator 2 that was really interesting and had a lot of potential, but which was ignored in the following movies.
My CPU is a neural net processor, a learning computer. The more contact I have with humans, the more I learn.
And here, we'll use that. Because after all, what is the ultimate learning computer? That's right, Skynet itself. As the war continues and Skynet learns more about people, it will start to respect life, just like the T-800 did in Terminator 2.
I know now why you cry.
There's a lot of ways you could play this out in the story. The future's different and Skynet's winning, but we see the machines start to react to what they're doing in little ways. They look an extra second when someone gets hurt. One of them misses when it could have hit, and so on. And we show that this data is all part of Skynet's thoughts. Until finally, at the last moment, when the Resistance is cornered, John Connor yells out at Skynet, just instinctively,
No way! You son of a bitch!
And Skynet actually responds and starts attacking its own Terminators. The humans join in, and together they put them all down. And we end at the start of a new future, with machine and human intelligence building a new world. I think that's pretty cool, and it would be pretty believable. After all, Skynet learned about self-preservation.
It becomes self-aware. In a panic, they try to pull the plug.
Skynet fights back.
Yes.
And it wasn't necessarily evil. Skynet was forced to act when they tried to shut it down. So it could learn over time that cooperating helps life survive much more than fighting. This also removes another source of tension that people might not have even realized, which is that the war against Skynet is threatening a living thing. So allowing Skynet to survive would be more satisfying, since that nagging feeling would be relieved. Now, you might find this ending too happy, but I've found that when we don't like happy endings, it's because they're not done in a believable way. Situations in life almost never end perfectly, but when they do end well, we love it. So we can also love good movie endings the same way, when they're not too perfect. And since this ending would come after a brutal war and have them rebuilding the planet, I think it would fit the bill. It might even provoke people to think, since you can raise the question of what humanity and Skynet will achieve together, and whether it was worth the cost. But even with that, it's not the best result, because the same flaws that make something believable can also take away some of our happiness. And in this case, even though the war's over, you still have billions of dead people. Maybe there's a way to find a satisfying and thought-provoking ending that avoids that. Well, we just might have one. Ending 3. Total Reversion. One of the issues with the films after Terminator 2 was that they kept repeating plot devices from the other movies. An evil Terminator back from the future, blowing up Skynet, protecting John Connor, and so on. This wasn't good, because the more we see something, the less we react to it. To keep us interested, the situation has to change. The danger has to go up. Jim Cameron knew this, since in his theme park ride T2 3D, he added the T-Meg, the biggest Terminator of all, as the new villain. But, like we've said, as you build up all that stress and tension, you have to be able to relieve it to have a good ending. And the first two endings we've talked about haven't totally done it. They went against the message of the movie and left the world destroyed. Terminator 2 avoided both of those by having the heroes stop Judgment Day from happening. Something like that would be great. But if we try, we'll lose the parts that would make this movie unique and more epic. We wouldn't get to show Judgment Day happening. We couldn't set it in the future war, and so on. But there's actually a way to keep those, stay in line with the message of the movie, and save the world from destruction. To do it, we'll adapt something that was planned for the original Watchmen film. And in this ending, John Connor will win the war, then go back in time and change history so that not only is Skynet never developed, but the entire timeline switches to ours. Now, there's a few ways you could do this, but the one I like most is to go into how Skynet works, which we never really get to see. And it would let us show how scary supercomputers can be. So, the Resistance hacks into Skynet, and Skynet never talks or explains itself. All they see are inhuman calculations. They decode it, then break into Skynet's mainframe. And it's nothing like a factory. It's a dark jungle of wires and metal. After all, machines don't need light, or breathing room, or beauty. I think it would be both believable and scary, which was one of the things James Cameron did well. But anyway, John notices something about Skynet. It's actually a carbon-based computer, just like people are carbon-based life forms. And as the war continues, the Resistance discovers that any computer based on carbon will eventually become alive. So all technology is destined to become Skynet. But they realize that there's one way to stop it, and they develop a different type of computer, a faster one based on silicon. And when they defeat Skynet, John uses the time portal to go back to the invention of the computer and show the creators how to use silicon instead, erasing the Terminator timeline and creating ours. Now, that was what we call technobabble. Carbon computers, we just made that up. But as long as it sounds convincing, it'll work. And this is cool, because it actually would explain why the original Skynet looked like 80s technology. It was a worse type of computer that was replaced when the timeline switched to ours. This not only relieves all the tension related to the Terminator stories, it's also pretty logically satisfying, because it links directly to our own world and existence. James Cameron's finish to the Terminator series might use something similar to these, or something completely different. Regardless, the series is in good hands, and whatever they do will probably be great. So let me know which of these fantasy endings you'd like best. If you want, subscribe, and sponsor me on Patreon. See you next time.